This video is sponsored by Nebula. Imagine this, a right-wing to far-right party that is pro-EU, that is in favor of European integration, and wants European answers to Europe's biggest problems. Now, do we have such parties in Europe? We are not so sure. Let's first take a look at some of the most far-right parties in Europe. The AfD from Germany, Reconquest from France, Revival from Bulgaria, and quite a few more across the entire continent. These parties are very conservative, and also pretty clearly hard Eurosceptic. They want to undo European integration, not build on it. The AfD, for example, has called for a referendum on the euro and wants most EU powers handed back to national governments. These parties are part of the European parliamentary group called Europe of Sovereign Nations. Now, a very quick explainer. In the EU, all national parties team up into bigger political groups. There are 8 of these groups in the European Parliament. Think of them like massive coalitions of like-minded parties across the entire continent. The sovereignists consist of these 8 parties, and to make sense of all of these political groups, we created a big, beautiful political map. Naturally, the ESN group falls firmly in the bottom right quadrant: conservative, nationalist, and very anti-EU. Close to the sovereignists, we've got another alliance, the Patriots for Europe. This is also a group of right-wing conservative parties from across the continent. It includes some big players, like Le Pen's National Rally, Orbán's Fidesz, and Anno 2011 from Czech Republic. Now, they're not quite as Eurosceptic as the sovereignists, but instead they call for a Europe of nations, which basically means more power back to national governments, a return to a mainly economic union, and the power for each country to veto any law that comes from the EU. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, we've got the more liberal left-leaning forces, like the Green parties across Europe. They're very progressive and very pro-EU. They often champion even more European integration. For example, they've called for a European federation, removing the national veto in foreign policy, and doing more together, not less. Now, as for the other European groups, let's break them down quickly. The biggest group is EPP. They're center-right and pro-EU, and sit in the middle towards the right end of our graph. The second biggest party is the Social Democrats. They lean center-left and pro-European, so they sit in the top left quadrant. And then we have Renew Europe, a centrist group. They're strongly pro-EU, even more so than the EPP, and clearly believe in a more united Europe. On the far left, we've got the left. This group includes communist and radical left parties. They're extremely socialist and generally not fans of EU integration, so we place them in the bottom left quadrant. And finally, there's the ECR, the European Conservatives and Reformists. They're a conservative group, but very split on EU integration. Some support reforming it, others want less of it, so we'll place them somewhere in the middle, but we'll come back to them later. Now, take a look at this graph, and what do you notice? The top right quadrant, right-wing to far-right and pro-EU integration, is completely empty. And that brings us to the very big question, why? Why is there no major party in Europe that's both right-wing and strongly pro-European? We at EU Made Simple see 3 reasons. Firstly, nationalism. At its very core, right-wing politics includes conservatism, which is about preserving what already exists, what people know and trust. In modern European history, that usually means the nation-state. One flag, a sovereign government, one set of laws, and one cultural identity. So it's no surprise that ultra-conservatism can lead to nationalism. And European integration is the exact opposite. It represents change. It means sharing power and sometimes giving up power to institutions like the European Commission, the European Court of Justice, and the European Central Bank. And for many right-wing to far-right parties, that goes directly against their core beliefs, against what they call national sovereignty. Reason 2. The EU is seen as left-leaning and woke. Ask many right-wing voters what they think of the EU, and you might hear words like woke, globalist, liberal elite. Why? Because many EU policies are viewed as progressive or left-leaning, especially on climate policy, like the Green Deal and emission targets, migration and asylum rules, or LGBTQ+ rights and anti-discrimination laws. Take Hungary as an example. The EU has sanctioned Orban's government for undermining LGBTQ+ rights and restricting academic freedom. To Orban supporters, this looks like Brussels pushing Western liberal values onto a conservative country. And to be very fair, this perception isn't totally wrong. For the last 20+ years, the EPP, center-right, and the S&D, center-left, have dominated EU policymaking. So yes, many of the EU's laws do reflect consensus politics that lean more to the center or even center-left than to the hard right. And that brings us to our final reason: populism and anti-establishment politics. Many far-right and far-left parties in Europe today are deeply populist. But what exactly is populism? Well, in short, it's a political style that claims to speak for ordinary people who feel ignored or betrayed by the elites. Populists say things like, "The system doesn't work for us. The elites are corrupt. We're here to take it all back." And to them, the EU is the perfect villain. It's seen as distant, slow, packed with unelected officials, and nearly impossible to hold accountable. And when something goes wrong at home, it's convenient to point to the political elite far away in Brussels. It's their fault, not ours. A perfect example of this was during the Brexit campaign, where voters were promised that leaving the EU would free up £350 million a week for healthcare. A clear and powerful message, but it completely ignored the bigger picture, like the economic gains from EU membership, access to the single market, or the funding that flowed back into the UK through subsidies and investments. Still, the message stuck, and it became one of the main reasons the UK voted to leave. That's why so many populist parties lean into slogans like "Let's take back control," "Drain the swamp," or "Put our country first." So, those are the three main reasons why I think this quadrant, right-wing and pro-European, is so empty. But there are some exceptions that come close, and one of them is Giorgia Meloni, leader of the Brothers of Italy in Italy. Now, they're obviously conservative, but they're not as anti-EU as some people make them out to be. Meloni has said that the European Union should focus on the big issues of our time: foreign policy, defense, protecting Europe's external borders, completing the single market, and building a common energy policy. She's even among the 9 EU leaders who signed a joint statement supporting the introduction of qualified majority voting in foreign policy. This means she backs the idea of removing national vetoes so the EU can act more decisively on the world stage. Meanwhile, her party argues national issues should stay with national governments, like social or cultural policy. So, whether Meloni supports more European integration really depends on how you define it. Now, her party, Brothers of Italy, sits with the ECR, the European Conservatives and Reformists. And even the ECR slogan reflects Meloni's idea: do less, do better. Basically a Europe that focuses on fewer things but does them well, and through that becomes a stronger player on the world stage. But here's the problem. The ECR is so far from united. Take Peace from Poland or AUR from Romania. They're much more hardline than Meloni is. They're firmly against deeper integration in almost any form, even on things like foreign policy or defense. And unlike Meloni, they often present Brussels as a threat to national identity and values. So even if Meloni is somewhat pro-EU in her own way, the ECR as a group is simply too divided to be placed in the pro-integration quadrant. And that leads us to another big problem. Parties within these European political groups only represent voters in their own country. For example, Meloni doesn't represent me in Germany, as her party doesn't run any candidates here. Same goes for France, Spain, Romania, or any other European country for that matter. There's only one real exception to this, a party called Volt, a pan-European party that run the same program in every EU country. They actually campaign across borders, and they want a united Europe. But Volt sits at the very top left of our political map. They've moved significantly to the progressive liberal side with their policies. And there's simply no counterweight on the right. No right-wing conservative pan-European party that says we want a strong Europe, but also want to be very tough on migration, and maybe even to protect the role of Christianity in public life. This, my friends, is dearly missing. And if you ask me, dearly needed. Now, I definitely don't agree with everything strong conservatives stand for. Far from it. But I do think conservatism plays a super important role in politics. That's why I think it's a real shame that so many right-wing and far-right parties are always focused on breaking the EU. I feel it would be more constructive if they fought for their ideas within the EU. Bring those conservative policies to the European level. Make your case and shape the system. But the deeper issue, I think, is cultural. People still feel their identity mainly with their country. But why is that? Because for me it's so different. Because on a local scale, I live in Munich. I feel at home here. I care about local policies, infrastructure, schools, hospitals, city planning, that kind of thing. Because that's where my day-to-day life happens. On a national level though, I still feel very Dutch. Even though I don't live in the Netherlands anymore. I connect with the culture, the directness, the tolerance, and the liberal attitude. And that's why I care about national debates on things like cultural and social policy. And on a continental scale, I feel European. Honestly, I love this continent. I've seen a lot of the world, and I'm not going to lie. Europe is simply the best in my eyes. The mix of cultures, the history, the values, the quality of life. It's something worth protecting. And that's why I care about European foreign and defense policy. And because I feel connected at all three levels, local, national, and European, I believe we need different political approaches for each. Some things can only be solved locally, others only nationally. And some things, like defense, climate, or trade, can only be solved at the European level. I mean, can my city Munich protect itself from an invasion? Can it sign a trade deal with Brazil? Of course not. You need Europe for that. So instead of trying to tear down that third level, I wish right-wing and far-right parties would start fighting for their ideas at the EU level. Maybe even create a right-wing equivalent of Volt. I think that would get a lot of traction, and deservedly so. If you want to understand Europe better, you're in the right place. We break down the most important EU stories, clear, critically, and simple, but often interrupted by ads. No ads, no algorithm deciding what you should watch.
Wow! 1, 2, 3, 4.
You can watch EU Made Simple completely ad-free on Nebula, our sponsor for today's video. Nebula really is an awesome streaming platform, made by content creators. Some even have their own original series. My personal hot list. First, Real Life Lore and his series War Room. A monthly update on global conflicts that often don't make the headlines, like the one in Sudan. Second, Wendover's The Logistics of X, showing, for example, how the US military, as massive as it is, moves an entire army across the globe. It really is insane and an eye-opener. Or Arctic to Africa. Two guys traveling all the way from Northern Europe to Africa by train.
This is our train.
Not exactly a smooth ride, and definitely no comment on the German train system here.
Oh.
And last but not least, what about our channel, EU Made Simple? On Nebula, you'll get all our videos completely ad and sponsor free, and sometimes even early access to new releases or insights into EUMS behind the scenes. Now, if you like our videos, you'll love Nebula, and with our link, you get 40% off. That's literally just $36 for an entire year, or $3 a month. So go to go.nebula.tv/EUMadeSimple to sign up. And thank you so much to our presidents, Jan, Schaukje, Kristin, Peter, HEVD, BJ Unite Europe, Stefan, and Mr. Probot.